Welcome back to Tabletop Assault. I'm Ross, and today I'm going to cover some of the Drukhari rules preview that Games Workshop put out today. Drukhari being one of the first army that I ever collected, and one I've still hold in high regard ever since, and so I'm very excited to be covering some of the new stuff we will see over the coming week as we come to their new Codex. So in this we're going to see Lords of Kamura, Favoured Retinues, Raiding Forces, Cabal of the Poisoned Tongue, Power from Pain, Combat Drugs and a few relics as well. So let's have a look at these previews. First off, we have a look at Lords of Kamura. Unlockable ability for a few points allows us to upgrade an Archon to Master Archon, bringing new abilities, relics and warlord traits. As a speculation note, this is Drukhari equivalent to Space Marine Chapter Command, Necron's Cryptech Arcana and Death Guard Deadly Pathogens. Close equivalent is that of Space Marines, as there is ability, relic and warlord trait option, which is different to sort of how the Necrons and Death Guard one worked. Space Marines had 7 upgrades to 7 different character types. As a speculation there, Drukhari has more restrictive amount of HQs. I will calculate this one day. I think it's basically 7 to goodness knows how many Space Marines I've got. But I speculate that there will be 2 to 3 for Master of Archon, Master Succubus, wherever that might be, and Master Homunculus, wherever the title may be called there. They confirmed that there would be similar rules for Succubus and Homunculus, but we don't know what their title may be, and we don't know how many of each one there would be. As there was 7 for Space Marines, I'm going to guess there's going to be roughly 7 spread out for the 3 different types of HQs here. From the one we were shown, which is Splintered Genius, this seems to be very combat survival focus and not on boosting units around them. For this I'll mention interesting aspects using some new information, but some from the old codex that may change. With these 3 upgrades and choosing to use all, I think an Agonizer from its current codex iteration would be a good call. I do not know yet what the Agonizer will be in the next codex, but if it is largely the same, combining all this, there will be some interesting things. For instance, we'll talk about Obsession that does give 3+ to your poison weapons, but if you take all that into account, including this, then you could possibly have an Agonizer that has 3+ to wound anything but vehicles, -2 AP, and then if you take the I think it's the Warlord trait, it's 2 damage as well. So along with this, the one-off trick to do where you can attack again at the end of the phase can be a sudden spike in damage. All this may seem a little bit expensive, as you are then paying points, you're paying warlord traits and you're playing relics, and there may be plenty of other options throughout there. Final thoughts on this part is I like this. I see a lot of potential, and I think it will have some good special rules that will decide whether you want to take it or not. If there's a really good relic or warlord trait, it may be worth paying the points as well. But then again, this is not the only reward we will see for this. Next up in the preview was Favoured Retinues, something a little bit different, but also something we're going to be familiar with. So it shows a preview of Cabalite Trueborn. Many fans will be excited to see this return, but there is some differences. Unlocked for each Master Archon unit in your army, 1 Cabalite Warrior unit becomes Cabalite Trueborn. Unit maximum size is 10. They become 2+ ballistic skill, +1 to leadership, and each mod on this unit ignores ballistic skill modifiers for ranged attack. Slightly different to old Trueborn, where what we'd previously do is, you'd get an increased amount of special weapons and I think heavy weapons, and use that to fill up a venom. In previous times I would just use it to fill up blaster units, and then I'd fly around with lots of blasters firing away. I'm going to speculate that that isn't the case anymore, that it's just going to be the upgrades they talked about. You're not going to get actual increased amounts of weapon choices. I feel this route is much more interesting, as long as there's plenty of deployment options to keep this unit safe, this could be a very highly accurate unit to drop in and wreak havoc for units that rely on 2-hit debuffs to survive. My speculation here will be Succubus and Homunculuses are mentioned to have their own units, and we'll see Hecatrix, Blood Bribes for Witches, and an upgrade possible for Racks, I think. Final thoughts, excellent addition and another good reason to take the Master of Archon or Succubus and Homunculi. I'm glad to see that they're leaning towards making Cabalite warriors ranged troops, as Psychic Awakening and their additional attack on profile warned me that they were still trying to push this combat orientated role for Cabalite warriors, which is clearly not really the case for them. That is for witches. I'm glad to see that there is a way to upgrade Cabalite warriors ranged capabilities. So overall I think this is very interesting, and excited to see where they go with the succubus and the homunculi on this favoured retinue. We then looked at raiding forces. Raiding forces detachment options for Drukhari is back. I always found it interesting. I believe at the start of 8th they said there was going to be lots of different detachment options, but as far as I'm aware, Drukhari were the only force that largely got this added in. In previous edition, 8th edition, this was sort of hurt by an FAQ update bringing battalions into 5 command points instead of 3 command points. This happened a few months after Drukhari, and in 9th edition this still works okay to a degree as far as I'm aware. I don't often have a chance to play as or against Drukhari, so I don't want to speak with full authority there. I feel Drukhari and demons, as they have such different keywords, you know, they're not all, for instance, Space Marines, or they're not all Chaos Space Marines, they do have sub-factions within them. This is a very important thing to address in terms of how their detachments work. 2 ways to organise your detachments now. You have raiding forces. Each detachment must be separated into a Cabal detachment, a Witch Cult detachment, and a Homunculus Coven detachment. I can imagine this will be your sort of go-to detachment organising for Drukhari if you wish to keep things simple, fairly easy to organise, and allows you to focus on mainly Cabal, Witch Cult or Homunculus depending on your playstyle. But the advantage of this is that your patrol detachments are going to cost 0 command points, so that's quite good to see there. For instance, if you wanted a Cabal of the Black Heart detachment and a Cabal of the Poisoned Tongue, you can. I do not think there will be restrictions on your Cabal Witch Homunculus obsessions between detachments, but we'll see. That's a bit of a speculation, that one, but I'd find it very surprising if it was restrictive. Then you also have the option of a real space raid. This is a little bit more complex, but it does have its own rewards. A few restrictions you must have. You must have an Archon as your warlord, 1 succubus, 1 homunculus, 1 Cabalite warrior unit, 1 witch unit and 1 rack unit. The rewards for this though is all units gain an obsession. What's interesting, it sort of implies that some of the obsessions may be like where they used to be previous between your witch cult, your Cabal units and then your Coven units. Now it almost seems like they're all going to be the same, but I find that a little bit less interesting than it was previously, but I could be wrong. It's just how it's worded. It's a little bit surprising. I think it is going to be separated out again, just the wording made it seem a bit odd. But the main advantage I could see is that you can choose relics from Witch Cult to Homunculus Coven, even though your warlord is a Cabal. This I could see is the biggest advantage, being able to access all relics, which is not possible, I believe, in the raiding force. I imagine that if your warlord is a Witch Cult, then you won't have access to Cabal ones or Coven ones, and vice versa for all of them. This way, if you have a real space raiding, you can have access to all the relics. Your warlord replaces their overlord ability. Speculation is reroll 1 step for Cabal core attacks to affecting all those in the real space raider core. Final thoughts, I'm very glad to see this updated. There's a lot of joy of playing Drukhari being able to mix in these very, very widely different factions between your Cabal, your Cult and your Coven, and having these 2 different methods rewards different playstyles. Excited to see how it goes in the future, and yeah, I'm just glad to see this updated. We then had a focus on Cabal of the Poisoned Tongue, one of the obsessions used, and it's just interesting to see some changes here. So previously, Cabal of the Poisoned Tongue, the Serpent's Kiss, reroll wound rolls of 1 for melee weapons and poison weapons, though not including artifacts, has been updated to, again, just the Serpent's Kiss, but improves poison weapons in the detachment by 1, e.g. poison 4+ becomes poison 3+. An enemy unit that loses a model to a poison weapon in this detachment subtracts 1 from combat attrition. Overall an improvement for ranged weapons, as +1 to wound is better than reroll wound rolls of 1. However, melee may be hurt a little bit in this, I mean just a bit of speculation, as it only affects poison melee rather than all melee as before. It means like your Cabalite warriors won't benefit, but that's because obviously they do not fight in combat with poison weapons. I mean, speculating if their knives count as poison, even better, but I don't see that being the case. They'll only benefit from their ranged weapon. Mass splinter weapons will enjoy this obsession greatly, and may make splinter cans a very deadly weapon to anything but vehicles. Stratagem we saw still very good, as was Insidious Misdirection. Still very good to manipulate deployment where needed, but even better as you may place units in strategic reserve without paying additional points regardless of the units already in strategic reserve. Overall, pretty good to manipulate your movement and deployment, but as it takes place at the start of the battle round and not during a phase, it can be used multiple times, where previously this was mentioned in the stratagem as restricted to once per battle, which it no longer is. I can personally see this being errated in the future to once per battle, or maybe there's a rule I'm missing here that would restrict this. But overall, I think that being able to manipulate your movement will be absolutely key for Drukhari survival. So from this I can say I'm a big fan. I think the making your poison overall a lot stronger makes it easier to roll for, and yeah, extremely deadly. I'm very excited to see what the other obsessions could be. Power from Pain has been updated as well. Main change here is it now becomes it is all units if all units in your army are either Drukhari or unaligned. This certainly hurts those who like to ally Eldari codexes, but not surprising overall, as there has been a push to try and buff armies that use single codexes. Overall, I may have preferred if Drukhari received this buff, but if they only went Drukhari or unaligned, then they'd start one battle round higher on the Power from Pain charts. Maybe that might have been a little bit too much of a bonus, though I'm aware that certain obsessions may still have that, and then starting at turn 3 Power from Pain would have been too much. But overall, it has gone a bit of a rework in some areas. I'll go through these changes quickly, but I have also put them up in writing as well. Old turn 1 was Ignore Wounds turn 1, I think on 6+. New turn 1 is a 6+ Invul. Old turn 2 was Reroll Advance and Charge. New turn 2 is Advance and Charge. Old turn 3 was +1 to hit and fight phase. New turn 3 is +1 to fight and +1 to hit and fight phase, and vehicle monsters do not suffer penalty for firing heavy weapons in engagement range. Old turn 4 was Auto Pass Morale. New turn 4 is a 5+ Invul, and then old turn 5 was 1 leadership to enemy units within 6 inches, -1 leadership to enemy units within 6 inches. New turn 5 is Auto Pass Morale, and if enemy units if unit characteristics degrade, then consider units' remaining wounds as double for determining this. Overall thoughts, pretty good. It was a shame to lose the Ignore Wounds, but this is unsurprising. If Death Guard losing this makes me think that many armies it's going to be very rare to have Ignoring Wounds now. It seems like a mechanic that they want to try and certainly reduce, making them army-wide. Overall, I can sort of agree with this in many ways. I didn't like it when people just had 6+ Ignore wounds, because when there's multiple damage it was almost pointless. So to exchange this from Ignore Wounds to Invul, certainly in the case of 6+ Invul, I don't think it's particularly good. 5+ Invul is pretty good, but there is a few worries there as well. I'm also worried that many Drukhari units will not have inbuilt Invults now, such as Rax and Grotesque, though I imagine they may actually be switched to the Ignore Wounds now. Speculation. However, more importantly, Night Shields and Ravagers, Raiders and Venoms, do they just have the 5+ Invul already inbuilt to them, and then turn 4 and turn 1 just means very little to them? Or do they have something different? I hope they maybe exchange it so that, it's not just Venoms that benefit from -1 to hit, it is Ravagers and Raiders get the -1 to hit as well, and then they lose their Invul until the turn comes in. That to me seems like a fair exchange, though it may be a little bit good, because -1s to hit is very, very nice to have. I just a bit worry how that's going to work with other units with Invul saves when you have an overall stacking buff. It'll just be interesting to see in that one, but losing the Ignore Wounds and then exchanging it for Invuls has actually made me raise more questions. Advance and Charge is fantastic, allowing you to charge very easily in turn 2. I mean, Drukhari are one of the fastest armies in the game, and being able to just ensure you'll be even faster from turn 2 means there is definitely a push of engaging in combat, especially with a lot of these rules, +1 to hit in the fight phase. There seems to be a lot of push with combat in this army as well. But there is bonuses to shooting, but with how you see as Power from Pain, combat could be exceptionally deadly. Next up we have our combat drugs, a little bit of an update on them. We do not have the details on what the combat drugs specifically do, but we do see the differences of how they work, and it is very important to talk about this. So previously you could pick a drug on the table to benefit a unit, but you could only choose that drug twice. You could not choose it twice unless every other drug on that table had been already in use, though you could randomly roll in hopes of getting the drug you wanted. Where this failed was, simply put, there were some better than others when it came to drugs, and there was one in particular I think everyone saw as a tax and did everything they could to avoid it. With the update, that has made it a little bit easier to avoid any taxing sort of choices you have to make. You can now choose to use a drug any number of times, making it a lot easier to choose which one is suited for your army or your unit overall. You can, however, risk it, and you can randomly roll on the table to obtain 2 buffs on a unit. So instead of choosing, you can roll for it and you get 2 choices. This may be slightly unwieldy, having so many units, and if you manage to just randomly roll for all of them, wow, that's going to be a lot of bookkeeping. If you had, say, 5 different witch cult units and each of them had 2 different types of upgrades each of combat drugs, keeping very aware of which unit has which may be a difficult bookkeeping task. Maybe each of your units look slightly different in terms of paint scheme, then that might be a good way of keeping note of them. But if you do randomly roll, that might be difficult. But equally, if you just choose and you decide all of them I want to be a strength higher, then it's going to be very easy to keep charts of where your buffs are going to be. So I see this overall as a bit of a win, because it just means that you'll be able to be rewarded in a better way. The previous table had a variety of good options. Again, I'm going to be speculating a bit here, but being able to select now is excellent. We hope that you keep the +1 attack, +1 strength, +2 movement and +1 toughness. They seem fairly reasonable. The +2 movement was less desirable, but the other ones were extremely desirable. Dropping the +1 weapon skill seems likely, as by turn 3 this will have much less of an effect unless your opponent has a -1 to it, and then in which case you just kind of ignore it. But because there is access to +1s to it just through your power from pain, it seems unlikely that they'll keep the +1 weapon skill, but they might. And I'm pretty sure everyone would be delighted if the +2 leadership was gone. Can't say anything whether it will be or won't be, but I think everyone would be pretty happy that that would go, because usually you'd find people might select the +1 attack, +1 strength, +1 toughness, +2 movement, and then they'd maybe slightly roll for it, but they would certainly never, if they could, try and avoid the +2 leadership. So I hope overall that one is gone as a choice, but we do not know that at the moment. So thoughts on that? Seems far better for cult units. Not being restricted into selecting benefits we do not want is excellent, and then there is an additional reward for risking the decision. This seems to change from the mindset of you can choose but there will be a price, where you could previously choose but then you couldn't choose again unless there was something to happen, to now you can choose or you can risk it for an additional reward, which I think is a better mentality. You get a choice or there's a risk, rather than you get a choice with a punishment. So I think that's a much more creative way to look at the game, and I'm much more delighted to see how it works for the combat drugs. Lastly, we come to Relics. Now, not many details are on these, but a few classics have shown up. Again, a wee bit of an update. I mean, they've got to keep something behind so that we've got something to show later on in the updates through the week. So the Djinn Blade previously was melee +1 strength, -3 AP, D3 damage, +2 attack, and end of phase in which it fought with this weapon, roll a d6 and on a 1 that model takes mortal wounds. It has been slightly updated to melee +1 strength, -3 AP, 3 damage, +2 attack, and end of the phase roll a d6 if you made any attacks with this weapon, and on a 1 take mortal wounds. Very similar, but the d3 damage turned to 3 damage. Honestly surprising that it was 3 damage, not 2, as many D3 weapons have turned into usually flat 2 damages. However, I think that fits the Drukhari trying to be made far more deadly and lethal, so yeah, I find that very, very nice to see for the Djinn Blade. We also have the Nightmare Doll, which previously homunculus only. Inert to Suffering activates on a 4+, basically ignore wounds on a 4+. Now, updated 4+ wound is not lost. slight change to it for the fact that Power from Pain has changed. Honestly a bit better due to the lack of ignoring wounds for the army as a whole, though we can hope that Homunculus Coven units may retain this unit to a degree. Overall, my final thoughts is that what I'm seeing in the previews, I'm very positive on when it comes to Drukhari. Certainly there seems to be a lot more customization and specialism, especially those Cabalite Trueborn, but there's also some questions to be covered as well, especially from the Power of Pain and the invuls, and how the invuls from other previous units may apply, for instance the survivability of our Raiders, Ravagers and Venoms. I'm very curious to see how that works. I will endeavour to make sure there is Drukhari updates. I will hopefully be able to do a Codex review when I get a chance. That'll be once opportunities do arrive. So make sure you do have a look if you want, subscribe to the channel, keep up to date with any of our stuff, and check out our social media to see the projects that we are working on as well. But hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, please ask them. I'm always hopeful to answer all the ones I can, especially when it comes to Drukhari. I may not be playing them at the moment, but it is a faction I really endeavour to play in the future, as I was my first army and I'm excited to play them again. So thanks again, and we'll see you on our Tabletop Assault Battle Report.